He was sitting on a park bench in Chicago with a coffee he had stopped tasting 20 minutes ago, watching the leaves come down the way they come down in October, when there is no wind, just gravity, just time, doing what time does. He was not thinking about anything. That was the whole point of the bench. 4 small girls in matching green coats stopped in front of him. The one closest looked at his forearm and pointed. "Our mom has a tattoo just like yours." He looked down at the ink he had drawn himself 11 years ago, on a night he could still remember in exact detail. And he felt the ground shift under a bench that had not moved an inch. He had worn that design for over a decade. Hundreds of people had seen it. Nobody had ever looked at it and seen him, until now. He opened his mouth to answer the girl, and no sound came out at all. What happened over the next few hours would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness, humility, and second chances can change the world, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to the Aura Fables for more unforgettable stories. 3 years earlier, Daniel Reyes had been one of the most respected structural engineers in Chicago. He had a name on blueprints for 2 bridges and a hospital wing, and colleagues who trusted his instincts more than their own calculations. Then his wife Elena was diagnosed with an illness that took 18 months to explain what it wanted from their family, and took Elena herself not long after. Daniel had a 6-year-old daughter named Sophia, and a career that demanded 60-hour weeks he no longer had in him to give. Firms he had once consulted for called with condolences and then quietly stopped calling with work. So he made the only choice that let him pick Sophia up from school every day. He left engineering entirely and took a maintenance supervisor job at Ashcombe Tower, a gleaming 60-story building downtown owned by a man named Richard Ashcombe. Richard Ashcombe had inherited his father's company and doubled it through instinct, aggression, and a talent for making people beneath him feel exactly how far beneath him they were. He wore suits that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, drove a car worth more than Daniel's apartment, and had a habit of speaking about maintenance staff as though they were part of the building's infrastructure rather than people who occupied it. He did not know Daniel's name. He called him the fix-it guy and had done so for 11 months without once being corrected. Daniel wore his grey uniform, carried his worn toolbox, and kept his old engineering license quietly renewed in a drawer at home, a fact known to no one at Ashcombe Tower, not even the building manager who had hired him. He had a single tattoo on his forearm drawn the night after Elena's funeral. A compass with a broken needle, a stem with no flower, a bird in flight. Not arriving, not leaving, simply between. He never explained it to anyone who asked, and almost no one asked. He raised Sophie alone, made her lunch every morning before either of them was fully awake, and told her, on the hard nights, that quiet work done well was still worth doing, even when nobody was watching it get done. On the Saturday, this story is built around. Ashcombe Tower was 3 days from its most important event in a decade, the unveiling of a $40 million renovation meant to secure the building's largest prospective tenant, a technology firm considering it for their new headquarters. Richard Ashcombe had brought in a team of expensive outside consultants to walk the CEO and his board through the newly reinforced top floors, and had spent the better part of a year positioning this deal as the crowning achievement of his tenure running the company. Daniel had not been invited to the meeting. He had, however, flagged a concerning vibration in the Eastern support columns 2 weeks earlier, in a written memo that had gone unread, buried beneath contracts worth far more attention than a maintenance man's handwriting. The morning of the walkthrough, with the technology firm's entire board standing on the 40th floor admiring the view Richard had spent millions to frame, one of the newly reinforced beams let out a groan that silenced the room. A hairline stress fracture had opened along a welt. The renovation contractors had rushed to meet deadline. The building's chief consultant went pale. Richard Ashcombe's face drained of color as he watched a $40 million deal, and quite possibly a lawsuit, unfold in real time in front of the exact clients he needed most. The consultants argued over each other, contradicting their own calculations, none of them willing to be the one to say the floor needed to be evacuated in front of a client. Richard barked orders that solved nothing, his voice climbing in pitch as the silence around him grew heavier. In the back of the room, in his grey uniform, Daniel Reyes set down his toolbox and studied the ceiling, with the stillness of a man reading a language everyone else in the room had forgotten how to speak. "It's not the beam," he said. Nobody had asked him. Richard turned, irritated, ready to dismiss him without looking at him twice. "This isn't the time, fix-it guy." "It's the weld connecting it to the column," Daniel said, walking forward without hurrying. "Whoever did the retrofit skipped a secondary reinforcement plate. I flagged it 2 weeks ago." He crouched, ran his fingers along the fracture with the calm of someone who had done this exact motion 1,000 times, and said, "I can stabilize it in 20 minutes if someone hands me that torque wrench." The chief consultant scoffed, adjusting his cufflinks as though the interruption were beneath a response. "With respect, this requires a licensed structural engineer." Daniel stood, looked him directly in the eye, and said, "I am a licensed structural engineer. I designed the retrofit specifications for the Kinsey Street Bridge. My license number is in a drawer at my apartment, and I will happily read it to you, but I'd rather fix your building first." The room went utterly silent. Richard Ashcombe stared at the man he had called Fix-It Guy for 11 months, a man who had just revealed, calmly and without a trace of bitterness, that he had quietly been the most qualified person in the room the entire time. Daniel worked without another word, torque wrench in hand, while executives who had never learned his name watched him save the deal they had all failed to save. 18 minutes later, the fracture was stabilized and the floor was declared safe. As the room exhaled, the elevator doors opened and Sophia stepped out. She had come to bring her father his forgotten lunch, as she did most Saturdays, 7 years old, and entirely unaware she was walking into a room full of the city's most powerful executives. She saw her father standing at the center of it, sleeves rolled, hands steady, and the board of the technology firm, unprompted, began to applaud. Then Richard Ashcombe's own executives stood. Then the technology firm's CEO. Within moments, the entire 40th floor was on its feet, applauding a man in a grey uniform, while his daughter watched from the doorway, with tears sliding freely down her face, because she had never once seen her father applauded for anything, though she had always known, in the quiet certainty children carry about their parents, that he deserved it. Richard Ashcombe crossed the room and extended his hand, something in his posture smaller than it had been an hour earlier. "I owe you an apology I don't know how to make big enough," he said. "I never once asked your name." "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Reyes." In the weeks that followed, Richard Ashcombe promoted Daniel to Director of Structural Integrity for the entire building portfolio, at a salary that let Daniel finally exhale for the first time in 3 years. But Daniel made one request before signing anything: that every maintenance worker in the building receive a raise, and that their names, not their job titles, be printed on the building directory where tenants would see them. Richard agreed without hesitation, and later admitted to friends that it was the first request in years he hadn't tried to negotiate down. That same Saturday, before any of it had happened, Daniel had been sitting in the park with Sophia when 4 little girls in green coats stopped and pointed at his arm. Their mother, a woman named Nora, ran up moments later and stopped just as suddenly, staring at the same design tattooed on her own forearm, drawn independently, years apart, by two strangers carrying grief they had each shaped into nearly identical ink. They sat and talked for an hour while their children investigated a pile of leaves together, and neither of them fully understood yet that they had just stepped into the beginning of something, only that neither of them wanted the conversation to end. True greatness, as this story reminds us, is never measured by title, salary, or the cut of one's suit. It is measured by character, sustained quietly, in the rooms where no one is watching and no one is keeping score. Every person carries invisible battles beneath the uniform they wear to survive them, and quiet dignity, worn long enough, eventually finds the room and the moment that finally sees it.